The American farmer, upright steward of the land, paragon of all that is good and true in the American spirit. Except for that one time when, he wasn't. During the 1930s, an ecological catastrophe swept through the American heartland, and hundreds of thousands of farming families did what people always do when the place where they live becomes unlivable. They packed up and they went someplace else. And their fellow citizens welcomed these real Americans with open arms, right? Yeah, about that. Anti-immigration politicians, whether they're in the US or the UK or Sweden or India or Japan, they all tend to read from the same propaganda script when they attack immigrants. Immigrants are filthy, they're uneducated, they steal jobs, they spread disease, they have too many kids, they vote illegally. You've heard it all 100 times, and you might even believe some of it. But what you might not know is that script was written in America in the 1930s, and the original target of all that hate was other Americans. And why is that script so effective? We're going to get to that. During the 1930s, a series of droughts and decades of poor land management led to an environmental disaster known as the Dust Bowl. Huge swaths of farmland in Oklahoma, Arkansas, Texas, and Missouri became virtually uninhabitable as waves of dust storms choked the life out of the region. This triggered a wave of migration as farmers gathered what few possessions they could carry, abandoned their devastated homesteads, and set off to look for a brighter future elsewhere. They became known as Okies, even though they weren't all from Oklahoma, and Okie, as we'll see, was not a compliment. Over 300,000 of these migrants chose California as their destination for a couple of reasons. This was the height of the Great Depression, but California was handling it better than most. There were some jobs to be found in agriculture and other industries. Also, California's social safety net was stronger than most other states. Now, did the Okies' status as white, conservative, God-fearing, hard-working Americans protect them from discrimination? Not at all. In fact, some Californians outright despise the Okies and describe them in language eerily similar to language used today to describe immigrants. To give you an idea of how some Californians talked about the Okies, I'm going to refer to an incredible resource, the California Digital Newspaper Collection, which is a searchable database of scanned California newspapers maintained by the University of California Center for Bibliographical Studies and Research. Life for these migrants was tough. They had, after all, lost nearly everything. But their poverty-stricken state didn't win them the kind of compassion you'd expect. The state's Department of Health director said they differ as greatly from native Californians as if they were another race. Even relatively even-handed news articles describe them as hordes and their arrival as a threat. This editorial from the Santa Ana Journal describes the migrants as swarms of locusts and recommends using the police as shock troops to ward off the hordes of indigents, transients, and hobos. By the way, the LAPD did at one point form a bum brigade whose purpose was to keep the migrants out of Los Angeles. This piece in the Tulare Register vaguely refers to cases of assault and robbery as a result of courtesies shown to these migrants, and also notes that there have been instances of murder. It doesn't offer any real statistics, though, and we've talked before about how reporting on crime rates is often manipulated. That article also implies that young migrants did crime just for fun. The migrants were generally mocked for their lack of education, with even comedian Will Rogers, who famously said that he never met a man he didn't like, remarking that migration from Oklahoma to California raised the IQ of both states. Some health officials blamed their malnourished state on them being so ignorant that they were unfamiliar with the use of fruits and vegetables. Just like today's immigrants, they were accused of stealing jobs and lowering wages, but also said to lack even a spark of ambition. And some people said they came to California just for the state's relatively generous unemployment benefits. According to this piece, the newcomers want the benefits of high relief standards. They are registering in ever-increasing numbers to qualify for relief benefits, becoming California citizens, and acquiring the vote. Migrants acquiring the right to vote in California elections was a hot-button issue. Even if they did become state citizens, they were described as having artificial citizenship. And in some cases, their right to vote was blocked. They were even accused of voting illegally on a welfare measure that the press nicknamed ham and eggs. Is this starting to sound familiar yet? Another way to dehumanize the migrants was to emphasize the squalor of their camps, which were pretty rough, but come on, these people were absolutely destitute. Here's how one writer described their camps. Have you seen one of these Okie camps? Dirty, half-clothed kids and grown-ups too, wallowing in filth, sleeping in tents and boxboard shelters, skipping school, subject to disease, being raised, not reared, amid morally shaken, dejected poverty. Can we immunize ourselves and our children to keep these influences from our doors? Yes, the migrants were feared to be a disease vector. And of course, no panic about immigration would be complete without someone complaining that those people have too many darn kids. This letter to the editor asks, why, when people have nothing else, they will have lots of children. It's their refutation that their lives are useless and inconsequential. Perhaps that is why sex is so rampant among these Okies. Its pursuit and the indulgence therein are an escape for the moment, an attempt to drown the truth about themselves in sex, as some do in alcohol. For those of you too young to remember, letters to the editor are where we used to go to yell at each other before comment sections became a thing. That letter writer's attitude was not rare and became so mainstream that a Madera County health official recommended birth control education among a group noted for its fertility. Quality, not quantity, in human beings is the crying need of a punch-drunk world, made so by its imbeciles. And if they weren't going to stop having kids, then the state should simply take those kids away, according to this editorial writer. Rehabilitation of these people will require steps that are commonplace in Russia, could be carried out in Germany or Italy, and are now under a ban in the democracies. Children of migrants must become wards of the states or federal government to ensure education, to grow to manhood and womanhood in clean surroundings, to be taught values, to be trained to want and strive for the things that are ordinary to those in the middle classes of American life. At this point, I would like you to take a moment and think about the politicians and creators that you follow and the media you consume, and ask yourself if you've ever heard language like this before. And who were they talking about when you heard it? And how did it make you feel about them? Because if you're ever in need, if you ever become inconvenient, they're just as likely to say the same things about you. Now, in California's defense, there were plenty of people who worked hard to help the migrants as best they could, and it was the Great Depression. California's resources were under strain. But still, it's a pretty big leap from, we're sorry, but we simply can't help you, to, oh my God, you people are filthy and human vermin and we should take your kids. And yet, it's a leap that's extremely easy to make. And it's even easier if you get a push. Much of the vitriol aimed at the migrants was generated by astroturfed organizations like the California Citizens Association and the Associated Farmers. In case you're not familiar with the term, astroturfing is when a corporate-backed organization masquerades as a citizen-led grassroots movement, and I've made a whole video about the topic that you should watch. I'm really happy with that one. In this case, the astroturfed organizations were backed by big California agribusiness companies who had just come through some bruising strikes and were worried about the hundreds of thousands of new arrivals becoming union members, which is odd because the migrants didn't join unions, and in fact, they were notorious for crossing picket lines. But still, these agribusiness companies worked hard to keep their involvement a secret. A memo to the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce said that the money behind Associated Farmers should, quote, be kept a deep, dark secret. This is the only way we can win this fight. But why was it so easy to whip up hostility against this vulnerable population? Why is it so easy to get us to punch down? Unfortunately, it seems like this is something our brains are hardwired to do. In 2006, researchers at Princeton University hooked volunteers up to a neuroimaging scanner and showed them images of people from various social groups, ranging from the very wealthy to homeless individuals. 2/3 of the volunteers reported that their initial reaction to seeing images of homeless people was disgust. And the neuroimaging showed that their prefrontal cortex did not activate when they saw images of homeless individuals, indicating that they didn't even regard the homeless individuals as human beings. It's unclear what's behind this reaction, but one of the leading candidates is something called the just world hypothesis, which proposes that we all have an innate need to see the world as an orderly, predictable, and fair place where people get what they deserve. The concept was developed by social psychologist Melvin Lerner after a series of experiments he did during the 1960s. Like most psychological experiments during the 1960s, one of Lerner's experiments involved fake electric shocks. Study participants observed a volunteer who seemed to get an electric shock every time they answered a question incorrectly. At first, the observers had sympathy for the volunteer seemingly being shocked, It looked really painful. But as the experiment wore on, something changed. The observer's attitude became something more like, my God, man, have you tried not being stupid? And, why don't you just get up and leave? Lerner attributed this corrosion of sympathy to our inability to accept that the world can be random and that sometimes bad things happen to good people. Accepting that means accepting that bad things can happen to us. Even if you don't necessarily believe in a just world, we all have traces of this attitude within us simply because of the culture we all grew up in. Batman always gets the Joker. Luke Skywalker always blows up the Death Star.
Good guys always win, even in the 80s.
But believing that the good guys always win can turn us into villains. We can blame poverty on someone's life choices. We can say an abused spouse somehow deserved it. We can turn our back on all manner of injustice and desperation by telling ourselves, the universe has a plan. And propagandists know this. It's one of the reasons the Nazis made the people they rounded up to ship off to the camps look as wretched as possible. They wanted to minimize whatever potential sympathy ordinary German citizens might have felt for them. And I wonder if this isn't why every major religion in the world has made caring for the poor one of their central commandments. It might not be something that we are naturally inclined to do. But let's wrap this up on a high note and talk about what happened to the Okies. As manufacturing ramped up for World War II, a lot of them found good paying work in California factories, and they held on to the money that they earned. When the war was over, many of them used that money to reestablish themselves back where they came from. And they were criticized for that, because a lot of the people who previously wanted them to leave now wanted them to stay and contribute to California's tax base. When you're in the outgroup, you can't do anything right. And like many marginalized groups, they took the slur used against them and turned it into a term of pride, as exemplified by this 1969 hit by country legend Merle Haggard.
I'm proud to be an Okie from Muskogee, place where even squares can have a ball.
A link to all the sources and elements used to create this video is pinned in the first comment. Check out the California Digital Newspaper Collection. It's really neat. And as always, thanks for watching. Hey. Hey, kitten. Can you purr for the camera? Did you know the LAPD had a bum brigade? You know that everybody watching this in the UK thinks bum brigade is probably the funniest thing ever? Yes.